You clicked this video because you're interested in learning a language, but you're not entirely sure how to do it. In school, you were probably taught that language learning comes down to conscious memorization of grammar, sentence structure, and vocab. But you also probably noticed that basically nobody in your language learning class at the end of the class was able to understand or speak the language with any degree of fluency. Why is that? That's because traditional language learning classes follow a method of language learning that just doesn't match with how our brains actually acquire languages. Schools teach languages as if there's something that needs to be consciously memorized. But can you really consciously memorize an entire language? And even if you did, could you memorize it to the point where you'd be able to understand it and speak it fluently like your own native language, where you just hear a sound and you instantly get the meaning? Or when you're speaking, you're not having to think about the grammar consciously, you just naturally speak the language. Could you really achieve that just by consciously memorizing grammar and vocab? Recently, a lot of language learning researchers and people like me who just like to seriously learn languages are answering no to that question. And that's because of a theory of language learning from the 70s that was championed by Dr. Stephen Krashen called Comprehensible Input Theory. And in this video, I'm going to explain what that is and why it's going to unlock your potential to learn any language you want to learn. Comprehensible Input Theory is a language learning theory that posits that the way the brain acquires languages is by listening to messages in the languages you want to learn, which you can understand. Think about how a child learns a language. Before formal education, nobody's sitting down with a child and teaching them the grammar lessons and the sentence structure rules and the vocab words of English consciously. What's actually happening is people are communicating with the child in a way the child will understand, by speaking clearly, repeating themselves, maybe pointing to things, saying, this is that, do you want this, do you want that? And the child simply tries to understand what's being said to them. At first, small children only can understand a few words, a few phrases, but eventually that turns into complete sentences. And before there's any formal education, before there's any conscious thought about the language itself, the child can speak their native language with a decent level of fluency and understand with a decent level of fluency. Again, that's without any conscious understanding of how the language actually functions. Any understanding of grammar, object, subject, verbs, none of that. The child just is trying to understand what's being said to them, and they unconsciously develop their ability to speak and understand the language. And that's the heart of comprehensible input theory, that we acquire languages subconsciously by understanding messages spoken in the languages we want to learn. In traditional learning, the idea is very different. The idea is that we learn languages by learning about the languages. We learn languages by knowing how languages function. The processing speed it takes for someone to be able to listen to a bunch of words being said by somebody, referencing those words in their head, translating them into their native language, then trying to figure out what the sentence means by dissecting the grammar of what's being said to them, that's a very conscious and taxing process. And it's nothing like how we actually experience conversation in our native languages. So even if you could memorize the entire breadth of the language consciously, would that really translate to you being able to speak a foreign language just as intuitively as you can speak English, which I'm assuming you can speak because you're listening to this video? As an example of understanding how our brains learn languages, I'd ask you, are you thinking consciously right now about the tense I'm in? Are you saying, oh, he's in present tense or he's in past tense? Or are you thinking, oh, what's the object, subject, and verb of this sentence? No, you're not thinking consciously about any of the rules of the grammar of how I'm speaking. Instead, the sounds that I'm transmitting are simply arriving to your brain, and your brain is instantly getting meaning from it. There's no step of trying to consciously process the grammar and the vocab that I'm speaking. Instead, your brain has just matched the sounds that I'm saying with meaning in your head. So when I talk to you, you just instantly know what I'm trying to say. There's no conscious processing step that's occurring. It's important to say that you already learned a language. You learned English. Comprehensible input is just positing that that way that you learned your native language is simply the way that you learn every language. But you've probably heard that only kids can learn languages. The reason that, you could learn your native language is because you were a child. And now that you're not a child, it's impossible to learn another language. That's not true. The truth is, the reason it looks like that is because kids exist in a world full of comprehensible input. They exist in a world where people are trying to communicate to them in a way they'll understand. So when someone communicates with a child, they tend to use a lot of repetition. They tend to point to things. They tend to make their message as clear as possible to get on the level of the child. So the entire world of a child, the entire environment a child finds themselves in, is an environment full of comprehensible input. But when an adult moves to a foreign country, first of all, they're usually busy working. And the input they do hear in the language is so advanced and so above their level that it's just gonna sound like noise. People don't have the patience to try to break things down to you as if you're a child, because as an adult you're expected to speak the language of the country you're in. So it's not that adults can't learn the way children do, it's just that adults do not find themselves in the same environments that children find themselves in. And because adults don't find themselves in these environments full of comprehensible input, they tend to fall back on the ways adults do generally learn things, which is by studying, which is by grammar drills, which is by filling in the blanks, vocab lists, trying to treat the language as if it's an exam that you have to pass. We're all much more comfortable with this method because it's what we're taught in school. And not only that, but the idea that there's a set of concrete steps you can use to achieve fluency is also comforting in itself, because the reality is learning a language is a lot more about spending time in the language and absorbing the language than it is about concrete steps you can take to consciously kind of drill it into your head as if it's a bunch of facts about history or something of that nature. The truth is, there's no pre-planned syllabus that you can follow in language learning that's going to take you from zero to fluency. It's just about spending a lot of time listening to the language, taking in messages from the language that you understand. So what kind of input actually helps you acquire a language would be the next question. Because you could go throw on a movie in Spanish or French right now and understand absolutely nothing of that movie. That's not comprehensible input. In order for input to be considered comprehensible input, it has to be something that you can follow and understand. It doesn't mean you have to understand exactly what the words mean or exactly what the phrases mean. You have to follow the ideas, the emotion, and the story being communicated. It's not that you need to understand the grammar or the actual words, it's just that you need to understand the real meat of what the person's saying, the meaning that's trying to be conveyed. For example, to illustrate what I'm trying to say, if I spoke to you in advanced Spanish, you wouldn't know what I was saying at all. It would sound like noise. Si yo hablo como este y estoy hablando contigo por un cámara y estás allá completamente confundido, you're listening to what I'm saying, but it just sounds like noise to you, and you probably can't really pick out any specific meaning or anything I'm trying to convey. But if I was to speak to you like this, esta es mi mano, esta es mi mano, mi mano. That might make a bit more sense to you because I'm speaking and gesturing in a way that's conducive to you as a person who doesn't speak Spanish understanding what I'm trying to say. Almost like charades, where nobody's actually speaking at all, but you can still understand what they're trying to say. And what you're doing when you're listening to me speak like that is your brain is unconsciously connecting the sounds of the language with the meaning I'm trying to convey. Again, that's the heart of comprehensible input, connecting sounds of the language directly to meaning. So if you could take one thing away from this video, it would be that you don't study a language to learn a language. You don't study about the language to learn a language. You acquire languages by understanding messages given to you in those languages at your level. That's why in comprehensible input theory, we don't call it language learning, we call it language acquisition. Because language isn't something you consciously learn, it's something you absorb and acquire unconsciously. Thanks for watching the first video in my comprehensible input series. In this series, I'm going to explain what comprehensible input is, how to do it, and all of the frequently asked questions and common mistakes people can fall into when they're first getting into comprehensible input. Finally, if you're interested in starting your comprehensible input journey, I run a website called Langualytics where you can find content that's at your level in the language you're trying to learn, and you can track your progress as you progress through the levels of understanding. When you start comprehensible input, the two biggest problems you're going to have are where do I find content and how do I track my progress? This website will answer both of those questions. Thanks for checking out the video, and I'll see you in the next one.